Student laughed at for bringing father's medals to school. What happens next will shock you. The early morning sun filtered through the curtains of Ethan's room, casting a soft glow on the wooden box that sat on his desk. 10-year-old Ethan Turner stood before it, his small hands hovering over the polished surface, hesitant to open it. Today was show and tell day at school, and unlike his classmates who would bring toys, gadgets, or exotic souvenirs, Ethan had chosen something far more personal: his father's military medals. Ethan's father, Sergeant Brian Turner, was a decorated war veteran who had served in multiple conflicts overseas. The medals, neatly arranged inside the box, represented years of bravery, sacrifice, and service. Each one told a story of courage under fire, of lives saved, and of a dedication to duty that went beyond what most people could imagine. With a deep breath, Ethan finally opened the box. The medals gleamed in the morning light, their polished surfaces reflecting his wide-eyed gaze. There was the Purple Heart, awarded to his father for wounds received in combat. Next to it lay the Bronze Star, a testament to his heroic achievements in a war zone. Each medal had its own story, its own weight of memory and sacrifice. Ethan ran his fingers gently over the medals, feeling the raised surfaces of emblems and inscriptions. He remembered the rare occasions when his father had shared stories about his time in the military. Sergeant Turner was never one to boast about his accomplishments, always deflecting praise with a humble smile and a reminder that he was just doing his job. But Ethan knew better. To him, these medals symbolized not just his father's heroism, but the strength and courage he aspired to embody himself. As he carefully lifted the box, Ethan felt a mixture of pride and apprehension wash over him. Pride in his father's achievements, in the man who had risked everything to protect others, but also apprehension about sharing something so personal with his classmates. Many of them didn't know his father's story, and Ethan had never spoken much about it before. Would they understand? Would they care? The sound of his mother's voice calling him for breakfast snapped Ethan out of his reverie. "Coming." "Mom," he called back, gently closing the box and placing it in his backpack. As he zipped it up, he couldn't help but feel the weight of responsibility settling on his young shoulders. These weren't just pieces of metal and ribbon, they were pieces of his father's history, tangible proof of the sacrifices made for their country. Downstairs, the kitchen was filled with the aroma of toast and coffee. Ethan's mother, Sarah, was at the stove, flipping pancakes with practiced ease. She turned as Ethan entered, her smile faltering slightly as she noticed the serious expression on her son's face. "Everything okay, sweetie?" she asked, sliding a stack of pancakes onto a plate. Ethan nodded, taking his seat at the table. "Yeah, Mom. Just thinking about show and tell today." Sarah's eyes softened with understanding. She and Brian had discussed Ethan's decision to bring the medals to school, and while they were proud of their son's choice, they also worried about how it might be received. "Your father's medals are very special, Ethan," she said, sitting down across from him. "I'm sure your classmates will be impressed." Ethan poked at his pancakes with his fork. "What if they're not? What if they think it's boring?" Sarah reached across the table, gently squeezing her son's hand. "Honey, what those medals represent is far from boring. They tell a story of bravery, of sacrifice, of doing what's right even when it's hard. That's never boring." Her words seemed to bolster Ethan's resolve. He sat up a little straighter, a determined glint in his eye. "You're right, Mom. Dad's a hero, and I want everyone to know it." As they finished breakfast, the sound of a car horn outside announced the arrival of Ethan's carpool. With a quick hug from his mother and a reminder to be proud, Ethan shouldered his backpack and headed out the door. The drive to school was a blur of nervous anticipation for Ethan. He sat quietly in the back seat, one hand resting protectively on his backpack, while his classmates chattered excitedly about their own show-and-tell items. Tommy was bringing his new video game console, while Lisa couldn't stop talking about the seashells she'd collected on her recent beach vacation. Ethan listened to their excited voices, feeling increasingly out of place. His father's medals suddenly seemed so different from the fun, flashy items his friends were bringing. Would anyone even care about old pieces of metal pinned to velvet? As the car pulled up to the school, Ethan's stomach twisted with nerves. The building loomed before him, suddenly seeming much larger and more intimidating than usual. He clutched his backpack tightly as he got out of the car, the weight of the metal box a constant reminder of the task ahead. Walking through the school gates, Ethan caught sight of his best friend, Alex, waving from the playground. For a moment, Ethan considered going over to him, seeking some last-minute reassurance. But the first bell rang, signaling the start of the school day, and Ethan found himself swept along with the tide of students heading inside. As he made his way to his classroom, Ethan's mind raced with possibilities. He imagined standing in front of the class, opening the box to gasps of awe and admiration. But he also pictured confused stares and bored expressions, his classmates failing to see the significance of what he was sharing. Pausing outside the classroom door, Ethan took a deep breath. He thought of his father, of the courage it must have taken to earn those medals. If Dad could face danger for his country, Ethan thought, surely I can face my class for him. With renewed determination, Ethan stepped into the classroom. The day ahead would be a challenge, but he was ready to face it. He was ready to share his father's story, to help his classmates understand what true heroism looked like. As he took his seat, waiting for the teacher to call the class to order, Ethan felt a strange mix of nervousness and excitement. Whatever happened today, he knew one thing for certain. He was proud to be Sergeant Turner's son, and it was time the world knew why. Ms. Anderson's fifth-grade classroom buzzed with excitement as the students settled into their seats. The anticipation of Show and Tell Day had created an electric atmosphere, with whispers and giggles filling the air. Colorful backpacks bulged with treasures waiting to be revealed, and eager hands fidgeted with zippers and clasps. Ethan slid into his desk near the back of the room, carefully placing his backpack on the floor beside him. He could feel the weight of the metal box inside, a constant reminder of the task ahead. As he looked around at his classmates, excited faces, a knot of anxiety tightened in his stomach. Ms. Anderson clapped her hands, calling the class to attention. All right, everyone, it's time for show and tell. Who wants to go first? A forest of hands shot into the air, accompanied by a chorus of, me, me. Ethan's hand remained in his lap, his eyes fixed on his desk. He wasn't ready yet. He needed to see how the others did first. Tommy, why don't you start us off? Ms. Anderson said with a smile. Tommy bounded to the front of the room, his face beaming with excitement. From his backpack, he produced the latest gaming console, its sleek design drawing appreciative oohs and ahs from the class. This is the GameStation X, Tommy announced proudly. It's got the fastest processor ever, and the graphics are so real, it's like you're actually inside the game. The class erupted in cheers and questions. Everyone wanted to know about the games, the controllers, when Tommy got it. Ethan watched as his classmates crowded around Tommy, their eyes wide with admiration and envy. Next up was Lisa, who carefully laid out a collection of seashells on Ms. Anderson's desk. I collected these on my trip to Florida, she explained, holding up a large conch shell. If you put it to your ear, you can hear the ocean. Again, the class was enthralled. They passed the shells around, marveling at their colors and textures, asking Lisa about the beach and the ocean. As student after student presented their items, action figures, sports trophies, souvenirs from exotic vacations, Ethan felt his confidence ebbing away. His father's medals, which had seemed so important this morning, now felt out of place in this parade of shiny, exciting objects. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Miss Anderson called Ethan's name. Ethan, would you like to share your item with the class? For a moment, Ethan considered saying no, pretending he had forgotten to bring something. But then he thought of his father, of the courage it took to earn those medals. Taking a deep breath, Ethan stood up and walked to the front of the room, his backpack clutched tightly to his chest. The class watched with curious eyes as Ethan unzipped his backpack and carefully removed the wooden box. He placed it on Ms. Anderson's desk, his hands shaking slightly as he opened the lid. "These are my dad's military medals," Ethan began, his voice barely above a whisper. "He got them for being a hero." A confused silence fell over the classroom. The students leaned forward in their seats, straining to see what Ethan was showing them. But instead of the exciting gadgets or colorful souvenirs they had come to expect, all they saw were small pieces of metal pinned to a faded velvet lining. It was Jake, the class clown, who broke the silence. With a sarcastic laugh that cut through the room like a knife, he called out, "What are those? Junk from your grandpa's attic?" A ripple of giggles spread through the class. Ethan felt his cheeks burn as he tried to explain. "No, they're not junk. They're really important. This one," he pointed to the Purple Heart, "my dad got this for being her." But Jake wasn't finished. "Hero? What kind of hero? Does he fly or something?" More laughter followed, growing louder as other students joined in. "Maybe he's a superhero in disguise," someone called out from the back. "Yeah, Captain Junkman, here to save us from old medals," another voice chimed in. Each comment felt like a physical blow to Ethan. He stood there, frozen, the box of medals suddenly feeling impossibly heavy in his hands. He looked to Ms. Anderson for help, but she seemed unsure of how to handle the situation, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, Ethan stood there, gripping the edge of the metal box, caught between the urge to run back to his seat and the desperate need to make his classmates understand. The laughter seemed to grow louder, filling his ears until it was all he could hear. In that moment, Ethan felt more alone than he ever had before. The pride he had felt in his father's accomplishments was overshadowed by the pain of being mocked. A surge of anger cut through Ethan's embarrassment. These were his father's medals. They deserved respect, not ridicule. He opened his mouth, determined to defend his father's honor, but no sound came out. The words he wanted to say, about sacrifice, about bravery, about what it really means to be a hero, were stuck in his throat. Ms. Anderson, finally sensing the depth of Ethan's distress, stepped forward. "That's enough, class," she said, her voice firmer now. "Ethan, why don't you tell us more about these medals?" But it was too late. The moment had passed. Ethan, his face burning with shame and unshed tears, quietly closed the box. "It's okay, Ms. Anderson," he mumbled. "I'm done." With his head bowed, Ethan walked back to his desk, the sound of muffled snickers following him. He slid into his seat, wishing he could disappear. The metal box, which he had handled with such reverence this morning, was quickly shoved into his backpack, hidden away from the cruel laughter of his classmates. As Mrs. Anderson called the next student up for their presentation, Ethan sat in silence, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and hurt. How could something that meant so much to him mean so little to everyone else? How could they laugh at his father's bravery? The rest of the show and tell presentations passed in a blur. Ethan barely registered the excited chatter of his classmates as they showed off their toys and trinkets. All he could think about was how badly he had failed. Failed to honor his father. Failed to make his classmates understand. Failed to be as brave as the man whose medals now lay hidden in his backpack. As the bell rang, signaling the end of the period, Ethan remained in his seat, unable to join in the excited conversations around him. The day stretched ahead, suddenly seeming impossibly long. How would he face his classmates now? How could he explain to his parents what had happened? With a heavy heart, Ethan picked up his backpack, the weight of the medals inside now a burden rather than a source of pride. As he followed his classmates out of the room, he couldn't help but wonder if he had made a terrible mistake in bringing the medals to school. Little did he know, this moment of humiliation was just the beginning of a journey that would test his courage, challenge his classmates' perceptions, and ultimately reveal the true meaning of heroism. The hallway outside Mr. Anderson's classroom buzzed with the usual between-class chatter, but to Ethan, it all sounded muffled and distant. He moved through the crowd of students like a ghost, barely registering the jostling elbows and excited voices around him. The weight of his backpack, with the box of medals inside, seemed to grow heavier with each step. As he made his way to his next class, Ethan caught snippets of conversation that made his cheeks burn anew. "Did you see those old medals?" "Yeah, what was he thinking bringing that junk? So lame, compared to Tommy's new game station." Each comment was like a knife twisting in Ethan's gut. He kept his eyes fixed on the floor, wishing he could disappear into the polished linoleum tiles. The pride he had felt this morning when carefully packing the medals now seemed like a distant memory, replaced by a deep, aching embarrassment. In his math class, Ethan slid into his seat at the back of the room, hoping to avoid notice. But as the other students filed in, he could feel their eyes on him, could hear the whispered jokes and muffled laughter. Jake, the class clown who had started the mockery during show and tell, strutted in with a smirk on his face. As he passed Ethan's desk, he mimicked pinning a medal to his chest, then pretended to stumble under its weight, drawing snickers from those around him. Ethan hunched lower in his seat, his eyes burning with unshed tears. He tried to focus on the math problems on the board, but the numbers swam before his eyes, blurring into meaningless shapes. His mind kept replaying the moment in Miss Anderson's class, the laughter, the cruel comments, the feeling of utter humiliation. As the teacher droned on about fractions and decimals, Ethan's hand unconsciously moved to his backpack, feeling the outline of the metal box inside. He thought about his father, about the stories behind each of those medals. How could something that represented such bravery and sacrifice become a source of ridicule? The disconnect between what the medals meant to him and how his classmates had reacted left Ethan feeling lost and confused. When lunchtime arrived, Ethan lingered in the classroom, deliberately taking his time packing up his books. He dreaded the thought of facing the crowded cafeteria, of enduring more stares and whispers. By the time he finally made his way to the lunch line, most of the other students were already seated, their animated chatter filling the air. It seemed like everyone was still talking about show and tell, comparing the cool gadgets and exciting souvenirs that had been shared. No one mentioned the medals, and somehow that felt even worse than the earlier mockery. It was as if his father's service, his sacrifices, were so insignificant they weren't even worth discussing. Halfway through the lunch period, Ethan's best friend, Alex, approached his table. "Hey, Ethan," Alex said hesitantly, sliding into the seat across from him. "Are you okay? You seem really quiet today." Ethan shrugged, not meeting Alex's eyes. "I'm fine," he mumbled, pushing his peas around his plate with his fork. Alex fidgeted uncomfortably. "Look, about what happened in class. Jake was being a jerk. Those medals seemed pretty cool to me." For a moment, Ethan felt a flicker of hope. Maybe someone had understood after all. But then Alex continued. "I mean, they're kind of old and stuff, but I bet they're worth a lot of money, right? That's pretty awesome." The hope in Ethan's chest died as quickly as it had appeared. Even his best friend didn't get it. The medals weren't about money or being cool. They were about courage, about sacrifice, about his father being a real-life hero. But how could he explain that when no one seemed interested in listening? "Yeah, I guess," Ethan replied flatly. "Listen, I've got to go. I need to finish some homework." Ignoring Alex's confused look, Ethan grabbed his tray and fled the cafeteria. He found himself in the library, seeking refuge among the quiet stacks of books. As he wandered the aisles aimlessly, his fingers trailing along the spines of history books, Ethan felt a deep longing to talk to his father. Sergeant Turner would know what to say, would understand the mixture of shame and anger swirling in Ethan's chest, but his father was thousands of miles away, serving another tour of duty. And even if he were here, would Ethan have the courage to tell him what had happened? The thought of disappointing his father, of admitting that he had allowed others to mock his service, made Ethan feel sick to his stomach. As the final bell of the day rang, Ethan felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had made it through, even if just barely. Keeping his head down, he quickly packed up his things and headed for the school exit, eager to escape the whispers and stares that had followed him all day. Just as he reached the door, however, he heard Miss Anderson's voice calling his name. "Ethan, could you stay back for a moment, please?" Ethan's heart sank. He had hoped to avoid any further discussion of the disastrous show and tell, but it seemed his teacher had other ideas. Reluctantly, he turned back, watching as the other students filed past him, some still shooting curious glances his way. Ms. Anderson was sitting at her desk, a concerned expression on her face. As Ethan approached, she gestured for him to take a seat. "Ethan," she began gently, "I wanted to check in with you about what happened earlier. Those medals seemed very important to you." Ethan nodded silently, his eyes fixed on the floor. He could feel the weight of Miss Anderson's gaze, could sense her waiting for him to speak. But what could he say? How could he explain the depth of his hurt, the complexity of emotions tied up in those small pieces of metal? "You know," Ms. Anderson continued when it became clear Ethan wasn't going to respond, "I think there might be a lot more to those medals than what we saw today. Would you like to tell me about them?" For a moment, Ethan was tempted. The words were there, on the tip of his tongue, stories of his father's bravery, of battles fought and lives saved. But the memory of his classmates' laughter was still too fresh, the pain of their mockery too raw. "It's okay," he mumbled, still not meeting Miss Anderson's eyes. They're my dad's, from the army." Miss Anderson leaned forward, her voice soft but insistent. "Ethan, I get the feeling there's a lot more to it than that. What your classmates did today wasn't right. They didn't understand the significance of what you were sharing. But I'd like to understand, if you're willing to share." Ethan felt a lump forming in his throat. Part of him wanted to open up, to let out all the feelings he'd been bottling up all day. But another part, the part still smarting from the humiliation of show and tell, held him back. Can I think about it?" he finally managed to say. "Ms. Anderson nodded, a small smile on her face. "Of course, Ethan. Take all the time you need. Just know that I'm here if you want to talk, okay?" Ethan nodded gratefully, then quickly stood up, eager to escape. As he hurried out of the classroom and towards the school exit, his mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Relief at having made it through the day warred with lingering shame and a deep, aching sadness. As he stepped out into the afternoon sunlight, Ethan took a deep breath, trying to shake off the weight of the day. But even as he began the walk home, he couldn't help but wonder, had he made a terrible mistake in bringing the medals to school? And more importantly, how could he ever make his classmates understand what those medals truly meant? The journey home stretched before him, each step bringing him closer to having to explain to his mother what had happened. As Ethan walked, the medal box in his backpack seemed to grow heavier, a constant reminder of the day's events. Little did he know, this painful experience was just the beginning of a journey that would challenge him, his classmates, and their entire school to reconsider the true meaning of heroism and respect. The walk home felt longer than usual to Ethan, each step heavy with the weight of the day's events. As he approached his house, he could see his mother's car in the driveway, and a mix of relief and apprehension washed over him. Part of him longed for the comfort of home, for his mother's understanding embrace. But another part dreaded having to explain what had happened at school. Sarah Turner was in the kitchen when Ethan entered, her hands busy preparing dinner. She turned at the sound of the door, a smile lighting up her face. "Hi, sweetie. How was show and tell?" The question, innocent as it was, hit Ethan like a physical blow. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, to his horror and shame, he burst into tears. In an instant, Sarah was at his side, her arms wrapping around him in a protective embrace. "Oh, Ethan," she murmured, stroking his hair. "What happened?" Through his sobs, Ethan poured out the story of the day, the initial excitement, the cruel laughter, the mocking comments, and the crushing embarrassment that followed. Sarah listened in silence, her arms tightening around her son as she heard the pain in his voice. When Ethan finally fell silent, exhausted by the outpouring of emotion, Sarah gently lifted his chin, meeting his tear-stained eyes. "Ethan," she said softly, "I'm so sorry you had to go through that. But I want you to know something. Those medals, and what they represent, are important. Your father's service, his sacrifice, That's something to be proud of, no matter what anyone else thinks. Ethan nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. I know, Mom. I wish I could make them understand. Sarah was quiet for a moment, then said, Maybe you still can. Sometimes, people react badly to things they don't understand, but that doesn't mean they can't learn. As they talked, neither of them noticed the blinking light on the answering machine. It wasn't until later that evening, after Ethan had gone to bed, that Sarah played the message. It was from Miss Anderson. Mrs. Turner, this is Jennifer Anderson, Ethan's teacher. I'm calling about what happened during show and tell today. I think there's been a misunderstanding, and I'd like to discuss how we might address it. If you could give me a call back, I'd really appreciate it. The next morning, Ethan dragged his feet as he got ready for school. The thought of facing his classmates again filled him with dread. But as he came downstairs for breakfast, he found his mother waiting for him with an unexpected announcement. Ethan, she said, her voice gentle but firm. I spoke with Miss Anderson last night. She wants to talk to you before class starts this morning. She thinks there might be a way to help your classmates understand the importance of those medals. Ethan felt a flutter of anxiety in his stomach. Do I have to, Mom? Can't we just forget about it? Sarah knelt down, meeting her son's eyes. Honey, I know it's hard, but sometimes the right thing to do is also the hardest thing. Your father's service, and those medals, they're important. They deserve to be understood and respected. Will you give Ms. Anderson a chance to help? After a moment's hesitation, Ethan nodded. His mother's words had sparked a small flame of hope in his chest. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to make things right. When Ethan arrived at school, he found Miss Anderson waiting for him outside her classroom. Her warm smile helped ease some of the tension in his shoulders. Good morning, Ethan, she said kindly. Thank you for coming early. I was hoping we could talk a bit more about those medals you brought in yesterday. Ethan nodded, following her into the empty classroom. As they sat down, Ms. Anderson's expression grew serious. Ethan, I want to apologize for what happened yesterday. I should have stepped in sooner. Should have helped your classmates understand the significance of what you were sharing. Her words caught Ethan by surprise. He had been so caught up in his own embarrassment that he hadn't considered his teacher might feel badly about what had happened. It's okay, he mumbled, but Miss Anderson shook her head. No, it's not okay. What you brought to share was important, and it deserves respect. That's why I'd like to give you another chance to tell us about those medals. But this time, I'll be there to help guide the conversation. Would you be willing to try again? Ethan hesitated. The memory of yesterday's humiliation was still fresh, but there was something in Ms. Anderson's earnest expression that gave him courage. Slowly, he nodded. Excellent, Ms. Anderson said with a smile. Now, why don't you tell me about those medals? I'd like to understand their significance so I can help your classmates see it too. Taking a deep breath, Ethan began to speak. He told Ms. Anderson about his father's service, about the dangers he had faced and the sacrifices he had made. He explained what each medal represented: the Purple Heart awarded for wounds received in combat, the Bronze Star for acts of heroism. As he spoke, Ethan felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. Mrs. Anderson listened intently, asking questions that helped him articulate thoughts and feelings he had struggled to express before. By the time the first bell rang, signaling the start of the school day, Ethan felt a new sense of purpose. Ms. Anderson stood up, placing a gentle hand on Ethan's shoulder. Thank you for sharing that with me, Ethan. Your father's service is truly remarkable, and those medals represent something far more valuable than any toy or gadget. Now, let's help your classmates understand that too. As the other students began filing into the classroom, Ethan felt a mix of nervousness and determination. He watched as Ms. Anderson called the class to order, her voice carrying a note of seriousness that immediately caught everyone's attention. Class, she began, yesterday during show and tell, we made a mistake. We failed to recognize the significance of something very important. Today, we're going to correct that mistake. Ethan has agreed to give us another chance to learn about the medals he brought in. This time, with Miss Anderson's gentle guidance and his newfound confidence, the words flowed more easily. He talked about his father's bravery, about the sacrifices made by soldiers and their families. He explained what each medal represented, not just in terms of military honors, but in human cost and courage. As he spoke, Ethan saw the expressions on his classmates' faces change. The snickers and bored looks from yesterday were replaced by wide eyes and attentive faces. Even Jake, who had led the mockery before, seemed to be listening intently. When Ethan finished speaking, the classroom was silent for a moment. Then, hesitantly, hands began to rise. Students who had laughed yesterday now asked thoughtful questions. They wanted to know more about Sergeant Turner's experiences, about what it was like to have a parent serving overseas. As the discussion continued, Ethan felt a warm glow of pride replace the shame he had carried since yesterday. His classmates were finally beginning to understand. The medals were no longer just old junk to them. They had become symbols of real heroism, of sacrifices made for others. By the time the bell rang, signaling the end of the period, the atmosphere in the classroom had completely transformed. As the students filed out, many of them stopped to thank Ethan for sharing his father's story. Jake, looking awkward but sincere, even mumbled an apology for his behavior the day before. As Ethan packed up the medal box, carefully placing it back in his backpack, he felt a sense of accomplishment wash over him. He had faced his fear, had found the courage to speak up and help others understand. In doing so, he had honored his father's service in a way that felt more meaningful than ever before. Ms. Anderson approached him as the last students left the room. "You did a wonderful job, Ethan," she said warmly. "You should be very proud of yourself and of your father." Ethan nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "Thanks, Ms. Anderson. I'm glad they understand now." As he left the classroom, Ethan felt as though a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The hallway, which yesterday had seemed filled with whispers and mocking glances, now felt different. Classmates who had ignored him or laughed at him the day before now offered small smiles or nods of acknowledgement as he passed. Throughout the rest of the day, Ethan noticed a shift in how his classmates treated him. During math class, when the teacher asked for a volunteer to solve a problem on the board, several students suggested Ethan should do it, citing his bravery in speaking up earlier. In the cafeteria at lunch, instead of sitting alone, Ethan found himself surrounded by curious classmates who wanted to hear more about his father's experiences. Even Jake, the class clown who had started the mockery the day before, approached Ethan during recess, shuffling his feet and avoiding eye contact. Jake mumbled, "Hey, Ethan. I'm sorry about yesterday. I didn't know about your dad. That stuff about him. It's pretty cool." Ethan was surprised by Jake's apology, but he appreciated the gesture. "Thanks, Jake. It means a lot to hear you say that." As the final bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, Ethan found himself walking out of the building with a group of classmates rather than alone. They chatted animatedly about his father's medals, asking questions about military life and what it was like to have a parent serving overseas. When Ethan arrived home, his mother was waiting for him, a look of anticipation on her face. "How did it go today, sweetie?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. To her surprise and relief, Ethan's face broke into a wide smile. "It was great, Mom. Ms. Anderson helped me explain about Dad's medals. And everyone really listened this time. They asked questions and everything." Sarah pulled her son into a tight hug, her eyes glistening with unshed tears of pride. "Oh, Ethan, I'm so proud of you. It takes real courage to stand up and try again after being hurt. Your father would be so proud too." As they sat down for dinner that evening, Ethan couldn't stop talking about the day's events. He recounted how Ms. Anderson had guided the conversation, helping his classmates understand the significance of each medal. He described the look of awe on Tommy's face when he explained what the Purple Heart meant, and how Lisa had asked if she could write to his dad to thank him for his service. Sarah listened intently, her heart swelling with pride for her son's resilience and newfound confidence. As Ethan finished his story, she reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You know, Ethan, what you did today was very brave. It's not easy to face people who have hurt you and try to help them understand. That kind of courage? Well, it's not so different from the kind of bravery that earned your father those medals." Ethan's eyes widened at the comparison. He had never thought of it that way before. "Really?" he asked, his voice filled with wonder. Sarah nodded solemnly. "Really, courage isn't just about facing danger in battle. It's also about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. It's about helping others understand important truths, even when you're scared or hurt. Today, you showed that same kind of courage your father has." As Ethan went to bed that night, his mind was filled with thoughts of the day's events. He remembered the fear he had felt that morning, the dread of facing his classmates again. But he also remembered the sense of pride and accomplishment that had come from sharing his father's story, from helping others understand the true meaning of heroism. Just as he was drifting off to sleep, Ethan heard the faint ring of the telephone downstairs. A few moments later, his mother's excited voice carried up the stairs. "Ethan, come quick! It's your father on the phone!" In an instant, Ethan was wide awake, scrambling out of bed and racing down the stairs. His mother handed him the phone, her eyes shining with happiness. "Dad!" Ethan said breathlessly into the receiver. "Hey, champ!" Sergeant Turner's voice crackled over the line, distorted by distance but unmistakably warm and proud. "Your mom just told me what happened at school. I hear you've been quite the brave soldier yourself these past couple of days." Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. "I just wanted them to understand, Dad. About you, about what those medals really mean. And you did it, son. You stood tall and helped them see the truth. That's real courage, Ethan. I couldn't be prouder of you if I tried." As Ethan talked with his father, recounting the events of the past 2 days, he felt a warm glow of pride and love wash over him. He had faced a challenge and come out stronger. He had honored his father's service in a way that felt deeply meaningful, and in doing so, he had discovered a kind of strength within himself that he never knew he possessed. When he finally went back to bed that night, Ethan fell asleep with a smile on his face. The medal box sat on his bedside table, no longer a source of shame or embarrassment, but a proud reminder of both his father's service and his own newfound courage. As he drifted off, Ethan realized that he had learned an important lesson, one that would stay with him for the rest of his life. True heroism isn't just about medals and battles fought in far-off lands. It's also about the everyday courage to stand up for what's right, to help others understand, and to face your fears with dignity and determination. The following morning, Ethan woke up with a sense of anticipation that he hadn't felt in days. The conversation with his father the night before had left him feeling energized and proud. As he got ready for school, he found himself looking forward to the day ahead, eager to share more about his father's experiences with his now interested classmates. When Ethan arrived at school, he was surprised to find Ms. Anderson waiting for him at the entrance. Her face broke into a warm smile as she saw him approach. "Good morning, Ethan," she greeted him cheerfully. "I hope you're ready for a special day. I've been thinking about yesterday's discussion, and I believe we have an opportunity to turn this into a valuable learning experience for the whole class. Would you be willing to help me with that?" Ethan nodded enthusiastically, curious about what Ms. Anderson had in mind. As they walked to the classroom together, she explained her idea. She wanted to dedicate a portion of their social studies lessons to learning about military service and the significance of military honors. And she wanted Ethan to be a central part of that. "Your father's story has sparked a lot of interest and questions among your classmates," Ms. Anderson explained. "I think this is a perfect opportunity to help them understand more about the sacrifices made by military families and the true meaning of heroism. Would you be comfortable sharing more about your father's experiences?" Ethan felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness at the prospect. The memory of his phone call with his father the night before gave him courage. "Yes, Ms. Anderson," he replied with determination. "I'd like that." When they entered the classroom, Ethan was surprised to see that the usual seating arrangement had been changed. The desks were now arranged in a semicircle, with a small table at the front of the room. On the table, Ethan spotted his father's medal box. As the other students filed in, their curious glances darted between the new seating arrangement, the medal box, and Ethan. There was an air of anticipation in the room, a sense that something special was about to happen. Once everyone was seated, Ms. Anderson called the class to order. "Good morning, everyone," she began. "As you can see, we're doing things a little differently today. Yesterday, we learned something very important from Ethan about his father's military service. Today, we're going to delve deeper into what that service means and what these medals represent." She gestured for Ethan to join her at the front of the room. As he walked up, Ethan could feel all eyes on him, but this time, instead of mockery or indifference, he saw genuine interest in his classmates' faces. "Ethan has agreed to share more about his father's experiences with us," Ms. Anderson continued. "I want you all to listen carefully, and remember that what you're hearing is not just a story, it's a real part of our country's history, and a very personal part of Ethan's family history." With an encouraging nod from Ms. Anderson, Ethan took a deep breath and began to speak. He started with the basics, explaining that his father, Sergeant Brian Turner, had served multiple tours of duty in conflicts overseas. As he spoke, he opened the medal box, carefully lifting out each medal to show the class. "This is the Purple Heart," Ethan said, holding up the distinctive heart-shaped medal with its purple and gold ribbon. "My dad got this when he was injured during his second tour in Afghanistan." A quiet gasp rippled through the classroom. Tommy, who had been so proud of his video game console just days ago, raised his hand. "Was your dad okay?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Ethan nodded. "He was hurt pretty badly, but he recovered. He says he was lucky. Some of his friends weren't so fortunate." As Ethan continued, describing each medal and the circumstances under which his father had earned them, the atmosphere in the classroom grew more solemn. The students listened with rapt attention, their faces a mixture of awe and growing understanding. When Ethan held up the bronze star, Jake, the very boy who had started the mockery during the initial show and tell, asked quietly, "What did your dad do to get that one?" Ethan's voice swelled with pride as he recounted the story his father had told him. "There was an ambush," he explained. "My dad's unit was pinned down under heavy fire. One of the soldiers was hit and couldn't move. Even though it was really dangerous, my dad ran out to get him. He carried him to safety, while bullets were flying all around them." The classroom was silent for a moment as the students absorbed this information. Then Lisa spoke up, her voice filled with wonder. "Your dad is a real hero, Ethan. Like the ones in movies, but real." Ethan nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "Yeah, he is. But he says he's not special, that all the men and women he served with are heroes too. They all risked their lives to protect each other and to serve our country." As the discussion continued, Ms. Anderson gently guided the conversation, helping the students understand not just the physical dangers of military service, but the emotional toll as well. Ethan shared what it was like to have a parent deployed overseas, the worry, the long periods without communication, the joy of a phone call or a letter from far away. The students asked questions about everything from what kind of food soldiers eat to how they stay in touch with their families. Ethan answered as best he could, sometimes referring to notes he had made after his phone call with his father the night before. As the lesson drew to a close, Ms. Anderson addressed the class once more. "I want you all to think about what you've learned today," she said. "These medals represent more than just bravery in battle. They stand for sacrifice, for putting others before yourself, for standing up for what you believe in even when it's difficult or dangerous." She paused, looking around at the thoughtful faces of her students. "In a way, we're all called to be heroes in our everyday lives. We may not face the kind of danger Sergeant Turner did, but we all have opportunities to be brave, to stand up for what's right, to help others." Ethan showed us a kind of bravery too, by being willing to share his father's story with us, even after what happened during show and tell. The students nodded, many of them looking at Ethan with new respect. As the bell rang, signaling the end of the lesson, there was none of the usual rush to leave. Instead, students gathered around Ethan, asking to look at the medals up close, sharing stories about family members who had served in the military. As Ethan carefully packed the medals back into their box, he felt a sense of accomplishment and pride that went beyond anything he had experienced before. He had not only honored his father's service, but had helped his classmates understand something important about sacrifice, courage, and what it truly means to be a hero. The medal box, which just days ago had been a source of embarrassment and pain, now felt like a treasure. A link, not just to his father's bravery, but to Ethan's own growing understanding of courage and resilience. As the students filed out for their next class, many of them stopped to thank Ethan. Some shared stories about their own family members who had served in the military, while others expressed a newfound appreciation for the sacrifices made by service members and their families. Jake, the boy who had initially mocked Ethan's presentation, lingered behind. He approached Ethan with an air of hesitation, his usual bravado noticeably absent. "Hey, Ethan," he said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. I wanted to say I'm really sorry about how I acted before. Your dad, he's incredible, and you're pretty brave too, for standing up and sharing all this with us." Ethan was taken aback by Jake's sincerity. He nodded, accepting the apology. "Thanks, Jake. That means a lot." As Jake left, Miss Anderson approached Ethan, a warm smile on her face. "You did wonderfully, Ethan. I'm so proud of how you handled this situation. You've taught your classmates and me a valuable lesson about courage and the importance of understanding others' experiences." Ethan beamed at his teacher's praise. "Thanks, Ms. Anderson. I couldn't have done it without your help." The rest of the school day passed in a blur for Ethan. In each class, he noticed a change in how his classmates treated him. There were no more whispers or sidelong glances. Instead, he found himself included in conversations, asked for his opinion, treated with a new level of respect. During lunch, instead of sitting alone as he had the day before, Ethan found himself surrounded by classmates eager to hear more about his father. Tommy, who had been so proud of his video game console during the original show and tell, now seemed more interested in hearing about the real-life missions Ethan's father had been on. "Do you think your dad would come and talk to our class sometime?" Lisa asked, her eyes shining with excitement. "I bet he has some amazing stories." Ethan felt a surge of pride at the suggestion. "I don't know," he replied honestly. "He's still on active duty, but maybe when he comes home on leave, I could ask him." The idea sparked a flurry of excited chatter among his classmates. They began to brainstorm questions they would ask Sergeant Turner if he did come to speak to the class. As the final bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, Ethan found himself walking out of the building surrounded by a group of friends. The lonely walk home from the day before seemed like a distant memory. When Ethan arrived home, he found his mother waiting for him, a tentative smile on her face. "How was school today, sweetie?" she asked, her voice tinged with a mix of hope and concern. Ethan's face broke into a wide grin. "It was amazing, Mom," he exclaimed, launching into an excited recounting of the day's events. He told her about Ms. Anderson's special lesson, about how his classmates had listened intently to his father's story, about the questions they had asked and the respect they had shown. Sarah listened with growing pride and relief, happy tears glistening in her eyes. When Ethan finished his story, she pulled him into a tight hug. "Oh, Ethan," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so proud of you. You've shown such courage and maturity these past few days. Your father will be so proud when he hears about this." As if on cue, the phone rang. Sarah answered it, her face lighting up as she heard the voice on the other end. "Brian, we were just talking about you," she said, winking at Ethan. "Someone here is very eager to speak with you." She handed the phone to Ethan, who took it with trembling hands. "Dad?" he said, his voice quivering with excitement. "Hey, champ." Sergeant Turner's warm voice came through the line. "Your mom tells me you've had quite a day. Want to tell me about it?" For the next half hour, Ethan recounted the day's events to his father, his words tumbling out in an excited rush. He told him about Miss Anderson's lesson, about how his classmates had reacted to hearing about the medals, about the questions they had asked, and the new respect they had shown. Sergeant Turner listened intently, occasionally asking questions or offering words of encouragement. When Ethan finally paused for breath, his father spoke, his voice filled with pride and emotion. "Ethan, what you did today, that took real courage. Standing up in front of your class, sharing our family's story, helping your classmates understand what military service really means, that's not easy. I want you to know how proud I am of you." Ethan felt a warm glow of pride spread through his chest at his father's words. "Thanks, Dad," he said softly. "I just wanted them to understand, to know what a hero you are." There was a moment of silence on the line before Sergeant Turner spoke again, his voice gentle. "You know, son, heroism isn't just about what happens on the battlefield. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. It's about facing your fears and doing what needs to be done. These past few days, you've shown that kind of heroism. You're every bit as much a hero as I am." As Ethan ended the call with his father, he felt a sense of peace and pride that he had never experienced before. He had faced a difficult situation, had found the courage to stand up and share his father's story, and in doing so, had not only changed his classmates' perceptions, but had discovered a strength within himself that he never knew he possessed. That night, as Ethan got ready for bed, he paused to look at the medal box sitting on his dresser. The medals inside no longer seemed like just pieces of metal and ribbon. They were symbols of bravery, sacrifice, and honor, not just his father's, but his own as well. As he drifted off to sleep, Ethan realized that he had learned one of life's most valuable lessons, that true heroism comes in many forms, and that sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is to stand up and tell your story. The days that followed Ethan's presentation brought a noticeable shift in the atmosphere of Ms. Anderson's classroom. What had started as a simple show and tell gone wrong had blossomed into a profound learning experience that touched every student in unique ways. The change was most evident in the way Ethan's classmates interacted with him. Gone were the sidelong glances and whispered jokes. Instead, Ethan found himself at the center of genuine curiosity and respect. During breaks between classes, students would approach him with questions about his father's service, eager to learn more about the realities of military life. Tommy, who had once been so proud of his video game console, now seemed almost embarrassed by his earlier enthusiasm for virtual battles. One morning, he approached Ethan before class started. "Hey, Ethan," he began, fidgeting with the straps of his backpack. "I was wondering, do you think your dad would mind if I wrote him a letter? I'd like to thank him for his service." Ethan was touched by Tommy's request. "I think he'd really appreciate that, Tommy. I can give you his military address if you'd like." The idea caught on quickly. Soon, other students were asking for Sergeant Turner's address, each eager to express their gratitude in their own words. Ms. Anderson, seeing the students' enthusiasm, decided to incorporate letter writing into their English lessons, teaching the class about the proper format for formal letters while allowing them to express their newfound appreciation for military service. Lisa, always eager to take on new projects, approached Ms. Anderson with an idea. "Ms. Anderson," she said, her eyes shining with excitement, "I was thinking, what if we did something special to honor Ethan's dad and other veterans, like a mini exhibition in the school hallway?" Ms. Anderson's face lit up at the suggestion. "That's a wonderful idea, Lisa. Why don't you gather a few classmates and we can discuss how to make this happen?" The project quickly took on a life of its own. Students volunteered to create posters explaining the significance of different military medals. Others researched the history of the conflicts in which Sergeant Turner had served, creating timelines and maps to provide context for his service. Jake, who had initially mocked Ethan's presentation, threw himself into the project with unexpected enthusiasm. He approached Ethan one day after class, his usual cockiness replaced by an air of earnest determination. "Ethan," he said, "I've been thinking, My grandfather served in Vietnam, but he never talks about it. Do you think, would it be okay if I brought in his medals to add to the exhibition? Ethan was surprised and moved by Jake's request. Of course, Jake. I think that would be great. Maybe you could talk to your grandfather about his service too. I bet he has some amazing stories. Jake nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. Yeah, maybe it's time I asked him about it. Thanks, Ethan. As the exhibition took shape, Ethan was amazed by the transformation he saw in his classmates. Students who had never shown much interest in history or current events were now engaged in deep discussions about military strategy and international relations. The classroom buzzed with energy as students shared newly discovered facts about different branches of the military or debated the complexities of modern warfare. Ms. Anderson watched this transformation with a mixture of pride and awe. During a quiet moment, she pulled Ethan aside. You know, Ethan, she said softly, what you've done here goes beyond just sharing your father's story. You've opened up a whole new world of understanding for your classmates. You should be very proud of yourself. Ethan felt a warm glow of satisfaction at his teacher's words. He looked around the classroom, taking in the sight of his classmates engrossed in their various projects. Tommy was carefully writing his letter to Sergeant Turner, his tongue poking out in concentration. Lisa was directing a small group in the creation of a large thank you banner for veterans. Even Jake was fully engaged, poring over a book about military history with newfound fascination. The change extended beyond the classroom as well. Word of the class's project spread through the school, catching the attention of other teachers and students. Soon, Ethan found himself fielding questions from older students in the hallways, all eager to learn more about his father's experiences. Mr. Thompson nodded thoughtfully. I'd like to speak with Ethan, if that's all right. As Ethan approached the principal, he felt a flutter of nervousness in his stomach. But Mr. Thompson's warm smile put him at ease. Ethan, Mr. Thompson began, Ms. Anderson has told me about your father's medals and how you shared his story with the class. I must say, I'm impressed. Not just with your father's service, but with how you've handled this situation. You've sparked something special here. Ethan felt a surge of pride at the principal's words. Thank you, sir, he replied. I'm just glad everyone understands now. About the medals, and about what they represent. Mr. Thompson's eyes twinkled. Indeed. And I think this understanding shouldn't be limited to just your class. How would you feel about expanding this project? Perhaps we could make it a school-wide event. Ethan's eyes widened at the suggestion. Really? That would be amazing. The news of the school-wide expansion spread quickly, generating excitement throughout the building. Other classes began to get involved, each bringing their own unique perspective to the project. The art department offered to create a mural honoring veterans. The music teacher proposed a concert featuring patriotic songs and military hymns. The computer science class suggested setting up a video chat with active duty soldiers so students could ask questions directly. As the project grew, so did the impact on the students. The change was particularly noticeable in Jake Itzatz, who had undergone perhaps the most dramatic transformation. One afternoon, he approached Ethan with an unusually serious expression. Ethan, Jake began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. I wanted to tell you. I talked to my grandfather about his service in Vietnam. It was intense. He told me things he's never shared with anyone in the family before. Ethan listened intently as Jake continued. I never understood before why he gets quiet sometimes, or why he has nightmares. But now, I think I get it a little better. And it's all because of you, man. Because you were brave enough to share your dad's story. Jake's words hit Ethan hard. He realized then that the impact of his actions went far beyond just changing his classmates' perceptions of him. He had opened up conversations and understandings that stretched across generations. As the day of the school-wide event approached, excitement reached a fever pitch. Students from all grades were involved in some aspect of the project. The hallways were adorned with posters and artwork honoring veterans, and a sense of pride and unity permeated the school. The morning of the event, Ethan arrived at school to find a surprise waiting for him. Miss Anderson met him at the door, her face beaming with excitement. "Ethan," she said, barely containing her enthusiasm, "I have some news. Your father's commanding officer heard about our project. He's granted your dad special leave to attend the event. He'll be here this afternoon." Ethan felt his heart skip a beat. His father, here, at school. A mix of excitement and nerves washed over him. "Really? Dad's coming?" Miss Anderson nodded, squeezing Ethan's shoulder gently. "Really?" And Ethan, "He's not the only one. Word has spread, and several local veterans have asked to attend as well. Your project has touched a lot of people." As Ethan made his way to class, he felt as though he were walking on air. The hallways seemed different somehow, filled with an energy he'd never felt before. Students he barely knew smiled and waved at him, some even stopping to thank him for starting the project. In the classroom, Ethan found his classmates in a flurry of last-minute preparations. Tommy was rehearsing a speech he had written, while Lisa coordinated a group putting final touches on welcome banners for the veterans. Jake approached Ethan, a look of nervous excitement on his face. "Ethan," he said, "I wanted you to know, my grandfather's coming today. He said he hasn't worn his uniform in years, but he's wearing it for this, because of what you started." Ethan felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening. What had begun as a simple show and tell had grown into something far beyond anything he could have imagined. He had not only changed the perspectives of his classmates, but had created a ripple effect that was touching lives throughout the community. As the time for the event drew near, Ethan found himself standing at the school entrance, waiting nervously for his father to arrive. When he finally spotted Sergeant Turner walking up the path, resplendent in his dress uniform, Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. Sergeant Turner's face broke into a wide smile as he saw his son. "Ethan," he said, pulling him into a tight hug, "I'm so proud of you, son. So very proud." As father and son walked into the school together, Ethan realized that this moment, this day, was about so much more than just medals or military service. It was about understanding, respect, and the power of sharing our stories. It was about how one small act of courage could spark a change that touched countless lives. And as they entered the bustling school hallway, filled with excited students, proud veterans, and thankful community members, Ethan knew that this was just the beginning. The perspective of his class, of his entire school, had indeed changed. But more importantly, Ethan himself had changed. He had discovered a strength within himself he never knew existed, and he had learned that true heroism comes in many forms. The medals that had once been a source of embarrassment now symbolized not just his father's bravery, but a journey of growth, understanding, and connection that Ethan would carry with him for the rest of his life. The school auditorium buzzed with excitement as students, teachers, and community members filed in for the special assembly. The room had been transformed, with patriotic bunting adorning the walls and a large banner reading, "Honoring Our Heroes," hanging above the stage. The excitement was palpable, a far cry from the usual restlessness that accompanied school assemblies. Ethan sat in the front row, his father beside him in his crisp dress uniform. Sergeant Turner's presence had caused quite a stir among the students, many of whom had never seen a real soldier up close before. Ethan couldn't help but feel a swell of pride every time he glanced at his father, the medals on his chest gleaming under the auditorium lights. As the last of the attendees took their seats, Principal Thompson stepped up to the podium. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to the stage. "Good afternoon, everyone," he began, his voice carrying across the hushed auditorium. "We are gathered here today for a very special reason. What started as a simple show-and-tell presentation in Miss Anderson's 5th grade class has blossomed into something truly remarkable. Today, we come together to learn about service, sacrifice, and what it truly means to be a hero." Principal Thompson went on to explain the journey that had led to this moment, from Ethan's initial presentation to the school-wide project it had inspired. As he spoke, Ethan felt a mix of emotions washing over him: pride, nervousness, and a deep sense of responsibility. "And now," Principal Thompson continued, "I'd like to invite the young man who started it all to come up and say a few words. Ethan Turner, would you please join me on stage?" A hush fell over the auditorium as Ethan stood up. He felt his father's reassuring hand on his shoulder, giving him a gentle squeeze of encouragement. Taking a deep breath, Ethan made his way to the stage, each step feeling both terrifying and exhilarating. As he reached the podium, Ethan looked out at the sea of faces before him. He saw his classmates, beaming with encouragement. He saw older students, some of whom he recognized from the hallways, watching with curiosity. And scattered throughout the audience, he saw men and women in military uniforms, veterans who had come to be part of this special day. For a moment, Ethan felt overwhelmed. But then his eyes found his father's face in the front row, and he felt a surge of courage. He began to speak, his voice shaky at first, but growing stronger with each word. "A week ago," Ethan started, "I brought my dad's medals to school for show and tell. I was so proud of them, of what they represented, but when I tried to share them with my class, things didn't go the way I expected." Ethan paused, remembering the pain and embarrassment of that day, but instead of shying away from it, he pressed on. "At first, I was hurt and angry. I didn't understand why my classmates couldn't see how special these medals were. But then, with the help of Ms. Anderson and my mom and dad, I realized something important. It wasn't that my classmates didn't care, they just didn't understand." As Ethan continued his speech, he shared the journey of the past week, how he had found the courage to try again, how his classmates had listened and learned, and how a simple class project had grown into something that touched the entire school and beyond. "What I've learned," Ethan said, his voice strong and clear, "is that being a hero isn't just about winning medals or fighting in wars. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. It's about helping others understand, even when you're scared or hurt. And sometimes, it's about having the courage to share your story so that others can learn from it." As Ethan concluded his speech, the auditorium erupted in applause. He saw tears in the eyes of some of the veterans, nods of approval from the teachers, and looks of admiration from his fellow students. Principal Thompson returned to the podium, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Thank you, Ethan, for that powerful message. And now, I'd like to invite our special guest speaker to the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sergeant Brian Turner." The applause grew even louder as Sergeant Turner made his way to the stage. He paused to give Ethan a hug before taking his place at the podium. As the room fell silent once more, Sergeant Turner began to speak. He talked about his experiences in the military, the challenges he had faced, the friendships he had formed, and the sacrifices he and his fellow soldiers had made. But he also spoke about the importance of understanding and respect, echoing Ethan's words about what it truly means to be a hero. "The medals I wear," Sergeant Turner said, his hand touching the decorations on his chest, "they're not just about what I've done. They represent the bravery and sacrifice of every man and woman I've served with. And they represent the courage of families like mine, who bear the weight of service in their own way." As Sergeant Turner's speech came to an end, he called Ethan back to the podium. Father and son stood side by side, a powerful image of two generations of courage and service. "My son," Sergeant Turner said, his voice thick with emotion, "has taught me something important this week. He's shown me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to share your story, to help others understand. Ethan, you've made me prouder than any medal ever could." The assembly concluded with a standing ovation, the entire auditorium on its feet, in a show of respect and appreciation. As Ethan and his father made their way back to their seats, they were stopped repeatedly by students, teachers, and community members, all wanting to express their gratitude. In the days and weeks that followed, the impact of the assembly continued to resonate throughout the school. Students who had never given much thought to military service or civic duty were now engaging in thoughtful discussions about what it means to serve one's community and country. The school instituted an annual Veterans Day program inspired by Ethan's project. Local veterans were invited to speak to classes, sharing their experiences and wisdom with a new generation. The hallway exhibition became a permanent fixture, updated each year with new stories and artifacts. For Ethan, the experience had been transformative. He had discovered a strength within himself he never knew existed. He had learned the power of perseverance, of standing up for what he believed in, and of helping others understand. The medals that had once been a source of embarrassment were now a symbol of not just his father's bravery, but of Ethan's own journey of growth and understanding. As the school year drew to a close, Ms. Anderson pulled Ethan aside after class. "Ethan," she said, her eyes shining with pride, "I want you to know how much you've impacted this school. You've taught us all a valuable lesson about courage, respect, and the importance of understanding others' experiences. You should be very proud of yourself." Ethan smiled, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. "Thank you, Ms. Anderson," he replied. "I couldn't have done it without your help and support." That evening, as Ethan sat at the dinner table with his parents, recounting the events of the past few weeks, he felt a sense of peace and accomplishment wash over him. He had faced a challenge head-on, had found the courage to share his father's story, and in doing so, had changed not just his own life, but the lives of those around him. As he looked at his father, Ethan saw not just a soldier, but a man who had made incredible sacrifices for his country and his family, and he realized that in his own way, he too had become a kind of hero, not through acts of physical bravery, but through the courage to stand up, speak out, and help others understand. The medals on the mantelpiece caught the light, gleaming softly in the evening sun. To Ethan, they now represented not just his father's service, but a journey of growth, understanding, and connection that had touched an entire community. And he knew that this was just the beginning of a lifelong commitment to honoring the true meaning of heroism in all its forms.
Disclaimer: this channel does not support or tolerate any form of discrimination, racism, prejudice, or violation of human rights. The stories presented here are original and created by the author with the aim of promoting reflection, awareness, and dialogue. All content is developed with respect for diversity and the dignity of all people.